The start of media began as simple journalism in the 1600s as a mere hobby, but as time went by, more and more people used it to learn about local and international events. Today, the news is an essential part of society and it has even evolved into a medium for people to communicate in less than seconds using pictures and messages. Before delving into the main topic of this presentation, I'd like to familiarize you with some brief history of journalism. According to the American Press Institute, an organization dedicated to protecting the First Amendment, journalism is the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. As mentioned before, the art of reporting recent and interesting events has been around for centuries, but since when have journalists had to follow code such as providing sources or giving explanations of their stories? Stephen J. A. Ward, an independent media ethicist, states in his article from 2015, "Journalism ethics does not belong to the journalists. Journalism ethics belongs to the public." He goes on to discuss the types of media needs and how citizens should always be allowed access to all types of information, including the facts behind it, context for the information, any criticism towards the journalist or his or her work, and also the ability to use media to express any opinions. But what happens when these ethics are not followed? Now, let's begin discussing the social problems in media that have dated back since broadcasting and mass media began in the 1920s. In his extensive article, Douglas Kellner wonderfully explores social problems in media. The published UCLA professor notes that, as communication studies began emerging in the 1930s and 1940s, and as theorists noted the power of propaganda in World War II, a wide range of studies began appearing of the social effects of the media, promoting the debate over the media and social problems, and the media as a social problem. These studies were finding that exposure to crime and violence was everywhere, and people defined this issue as a social problem. Parents saw delinquency in their children as more and more media, such as films and comic books, contained violence. As the decades went by, studies concluded that youthful activities such as listening to rap music, playing computer games, and watching television and movies all had influence on violent behavior in children. Even today, violence is everywhere, and thanks to advancements in technology, the graphics have never been better. It isn't hard to believe that children could be following suit to some of the images seen in video games and movies.
Get up!
Moving on from movies, television, and comics, let's look at social problems in broadcasting, such as the news and radio. After two interviews with college students, both from different parts of the country, both concur that some news channels tend to be biased in certain areas.
Do you think there's any certain biases in different news channels or like any news channels you watch?
Yeah, 100%.
How so? Like what channels?
For example, like Fox News only promotes things that they want to be promoted, so they're more of a Republican channel, so they promote more Republican aspects, and they go against Democratic issues more usual, and rather than focusing on the whole nation as a whole, they're more Republican-sided, and that's not right.
Do you think there's any different biases in different news channels, or is it all pretty good integrity?
I believe so, just because the TV highlights Black people and Middle Eastern people as the problem.
Little empirical evidence can prove their points correct, but Catherine Dean, a professor at Strathmore University, used her creative yet informational writing to clarify that there ought to be unequivocal separation between news and opinion. She goes on to discuss a central philosophical concept called objectivity, which is revealing the truth no matter what personal biases, and states that journalists need to report the facts and stay away from their own feelings. Dean asks numerous questions throughout the end of her article, leading the reader to believe that she does not think all journalists are following their own code of ethics.
I did rather well, and they went down the number of times they mentioned the other three candidates in the review of the debate. And it was, like 80, 90 times, depending on which it was. I was mentioned one time in all the discussion of the debate after it was over.
Right.
Now, you might argue I didn't win, or some people argue that I did.
You had the juice.
But it deserved more than one mention on all the stations. Somebody went and added these all up.
Thank you, Thomas.
So what's going on here? You're in this media business. I'd like to know exactly how that comes about.
Now that we've defined our social problem, it's time to analyze different solutions so that the effects of poor journalism and graphic media are as minimal as possible. One way to reduce the harm that careless reporters can put on their readers is for the readers themselves to get educated on the information being dispensed to them. An informed audience is a dangerous one for reporters or journalists with faulty stories, but it's not always easy to find the truth. Even today, with the internet, truth-seeking can take hours of researching and digging, and sometimes it can never be fully uncovered. Finding a solution to violence in media could prove to be an even more difficult challenge. Parents can try to limit their children to PG films and rated E for everyone video games, but in today's world, where a heavy percentage of kids under the age of 14 have a cell phone, it can be a nightmare trying to monitor everything they watch. Implementing solutions to a social problem can be a hard-fought struggle, but it is also true that an entire movement can start with just one. Change belongs in the hands of each individual person, and now it is time to bring change to this dramatic social issue.